Hello, my friends. How are you all doing? Hope you are doing good. Well, what is all up for today? We are going to look out for how to create a very simple web API using C Sharp language. Now, what we are not going to cover in this lecture is how to consume the API from our real client. Now, all of these may not be sounding very familiar to you, but in the due course of this session, you'll understand the topics really very well. So let's actually start by answering what exactly is a web API. Now, for your information, an API is Application Programming Interface. Now, the word API is coming from a long haul. It's not just, it has been a newly coined word, it's coming from long days. Now, API means anything that you can connect to, all right? So let's first make the basic understanding very clear. So what is really an API? If somebody is just telling you API, so what is an API? So API, so if just somebody saying that, okay, API means anything with which you can connect to. Now, you may connect with an API on your local system, or you may connect to an API to a remote computer. It doesn't matter where the API is lying, but as far as you can connect with it, we are all good, right? Now, let me give you an analogy. I already have some picture for you in my clipboard. So looking at this will immediately make you feel good that what is basically this? This is a socket, right? And this is a plug. Now, the socket can be made by any company. It doesn't matter who manufactures this socket as far as this plug can be inserted into it. All right. So that means this plug can be manufactured by all totally a different company, and these sockets can be manufactured by all totally a different company. We can have any number of any kind of plugs, and it can just go very well inside your socket. By the way, this kind of sockets is used in India. If any of you are watching outside India, just know that this kind of sockets are basically used in India. All right. So the main theory is that you should be able to write such a kind of API. I mean, you can think this as an API. It's a very consistent interface so that any plug can connect with it. So these plugs can be thought as a client, all right? So any plug can go and can just tuck plug in into it, right? So it's very easy. So it doesn't matter whoever is plugging in, you should be creating your device, I mean your API, in such a way so that any plug can connect with it. That is, any client can connect with it. So for the testing of an API, we definitely would need a client. So if I say that I am teaching you how to create an API, but not teaching you how to connect with it, then it is useless, right? I really need to show you how to connect with this, right? Now, you might have seen many times that whether this plug, I mean, whether this particular plug is having electricity or not can really be tested very easily by just, by just wiring a test lamp, right? So you can just have a test lamp and you can just switch it on and the test lamp lights up, bingo, you have the electricity. In a very similar notion, you have something test, a kind of test lamp, and that is available to you, this free client. I mean, this kind of client which can just be tested. You don't need a usual socket to test it. You just need two wires. You can just plug it on it and you can see if things are good. In a very similar sense, you need a software to test any API. So you can think this as an API, all right? API. And you can so before you actually go about creating the client, you can just download this Postman. All right. So this Postman is free of cost. You can just download it for free and you can test any API. I'll just tell you how exactly to use Postman to connect with our API. So in short, API is something that you create in any programming language. It doesn't matter which programming language you use. We are going to be using C Sharp for this lecture, of course, but you can create this in any major programming language. You can use C Sharp, you can use Java, right? You can use Java, you can use PHP, you can use whatnot. You can use C++, you can use just anything you say, right? So you can create API using any major programming languages, right? Now, when I say API, and when I say you can connect from a far-flung client, what kind of API that might be? It might be a remote API, right? That is, you turn this on and it automatically, it's kind of a remote stuff, you know. So how this really works? Well, these kind of APIs which can be connected remotely from a client, remotely, instead of physically going and plugging in, you can still connect to this kind of thing, right? Remotely, these kind of things, this kind of API can be called as a web API, right? So an API may not be a web API. It can just be an API. It can just be a couple of functions in your computer which can be called by other programs in your computer, right? So we have plenty of them. We have Win32 API, and we got .NET APIs and functions and all. But if you host an API on certain server, all right, on certain server, and any client can connect with it. Maybe you have this web API hosted in some server in Canada, and you are able to connect from an Indian phone. I mean, somewhere in India, somewhere in maybe some other part of the world, maybe Australia. Then we are good. So that means remotely a client can just connect with this API, right? So that is the basic thing about API. Now we are going to look into some general aspects of creating API, and we'll come to know one simple point that, in .NET, by now, .NET has got two flavors. It's a .NET framework, call it .NET framework, which is just the Windows only .NET, and we have got .NET Core, right? There are plenty of companies who are still using .NET framework because of its robustness, because of its reliability, and the last version of .NET framework is 4.8.1, finished. So no more, right? But the .NET Core, as of this time of recording, we have 9 now, but the stable version which is under release is .NET Core 8, right? But it really doesn't matter. Let me tell you, if you're watching this video after 5 years, right, this discussion will hold the same. Whichever version of .NET you use, whether core or framework, this is something that will remain invariant over time. I can promise you. I mean, right now. So let me tell you why I am going to be creating, how I am going to be creating an API which is same. I mean, the way you write it will be the same, whether you use .NET Framework or Core. I'm going to be showing you right now, all right? And I'll show you what kind of strategies I'm following so that you understand the fundamentals of it, and then I'll also show you how to connect with it. So let's get started. Basically, when I say web API, you have another important thing associated with the word web. Web essentially uses a protocol, which is, HTTP protocol, right? HTTP protocol. So whenever we say API, it's basically HTTP web API protocols, right? I mean, HTTP web APIs. So the main protocol in developing APIs are still HTTP. Okay, so HTTP web APIs. So I should write this HTTP in front of this web. You can clearly understand that basically this is HTTP web API. Now you should have some basic understanding of how exactly HTTP protocol works, or what is really HTTP, right? So people don't understand it and they jumpstart into developing API, which is to some extent not a good thing to do. So let me first explain in brief what is exactly HTTP. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. Okay, it is a protocol. Now follow me the word protocol. The protocol means set of rules. All right, it's a set of rules that you must adhere to, you must follow. All right, So protocol are the basic rules that both parties must follow, right? So if you are using web APIs, that means you are definitely following the HTTP standards. All right, now enough of theory. Let me give you some examples of what exactly an HTTP protocol really supports. An HTTP protocol is a way to connect a client to a server using certain verbs. Please note this, certain verbs. Yep, certain verbs. Now, apart from the main resource that you are requesting, let's say you are requesting something like you have a server like, let's say, www.abc.com, and then you want to connect with an API. Now APIs are essentially, they are essentially URLs. So basically when you say that I'm connecting to an API, all APIs will have a distinctive URL. So that's the first thing to identify an API. So all APIs will definitely contain what? Will definitely have a distinctive URL. Let's say this abc.com is having a distinctive URL like maybe employees. All right, so when I call this abc.com and I call this employees, what it really does, it connects to this server, it tries to get a list of all employees, and it will return you these employees to the client, right? It has to connect with it and then return. But then this API would like to know how is it going to treat this call. Please, once again, I'm going to tell you. So the remote server will not only intercept your URL, but also like to know what you like to do with it, right? So there are certain actions that you can perform on this URL, and these actions are, you can request a get. So these are the verbs. So you need to be sending two parameters at a minimum to the remote server. Number one is definitely the URL. You cannot do without it, right? So you need to identify the URL with which you are connecting. So an URL identifies a remote endpoint. We also call this as remote endpoint, right? So remote endpoint. So first of all, you must think about a remote endpoint. And secondly, you should definitely, or you can think this as firstly, I should not say secondly, because the first thing you should identify what you want to do and then where you want to do. So the verb actually says what you want to do, right? What you want to do. And oops, I should be taking more space. Okay, so what you want, and this is what, where you want, right? So, yep, so what you want and where you want. So these are the two things you must first make out, right? So get is one such verb. There are, however, a lot of verbs. The most common of them, the most common that we use almost daily, these are like get, post, put, and delete. We have patch and other verbs also, but these are the most commonly used verbs that are used, like used almost every time. So there are differences between these verbs. A get means you want to get something. So that means from this URL, you are intending to get some information. So that means you just want to get some information. Maybe some employee. Let me have it like employee. So that would be good. Like I have this guy, this URL, which is employee, and you just would like to get one employee. Now, you might have to have another thing which is very important, which is you might want to send this API some of your request parameters. That is, okay, you want to get employee, but which employee, right? The employee should have some employee ID, right? So now add to your bucket, there are three things. First, what you want, where you want, and whether you want to, now this is optional, the third one is optional, whether you want to pass some information to the server that, well, you just give me employee of this and this ID, right? So these are known as parameters. So maybe you can say the employee ID that I want is maybe 1011, right? So I want to have an employee having this employee ID, right? So that's the basic take on it. Now, there can be certain calls which do not require any parameter at all. Maybe you want to get a list of all employees. So, of course, I don't need any parameter to supply. You just think an API is as if you are calling a function, right? You are calling a function. You can think this as a function. In fact, it is indeed a function. I'm going to show you just in a few minutes. This is indeed a function that you need to call, and then you need to be passing certain parameter to this function. You can pass one or many parameters to this remote endpoint, right? I'll definitely write this as remote endpoint, right? This is our remote endpoint. First understand. So this is the basic thing that you should definitely understand. So this guy is a remote endpoint with which you are communicating. You can communicate in certain verbs. These are known as HTTP verbs, by the way. HTTP verbs, right? And you might pass certain parameter to this remote endpoint. Now, these are the standard HTTP protocols. This will hold whether you are using API or not. These kind of things were there in the HTTP since its inception, right? So, since the HTTP protocol was born, they were there. They were already there. It has just been a recent thing that we have started using API to this extent, but HTTP verbs, HTTP protocol already supported it, right? So let me get more close to it. Let me a little bit talk about this parameter. Now, there are two ways to pass such a kind of parameter. You can pass these parameters punched together with this URL, right? That is, I have less space in it. Let me now make it a little shorter. I can make it short. I can make it 24. Yeah, that's fine. So hope you can see my screen. So abc.com employee, and let's say you want to pass this information right with the remote endpoint, and you can do this very easily. There is something called as query string. I don't know where you are coming from, which background you're coming from. If you're already coming from a web background, you probably are already aware of this. So we can have this embedded right here. You can just have it right here with the main URL. The main URL is actually the remote endpoint, right? And you are then plugging in or attaching this extra parameter with the main URL. So we say that you are actually passing the data with the query string. Now these kinds of passing parameters are oftentimes known as get, right? However, this can also be post. I'll talk about what is the difference between get and post and other stuff definitely. But just know that basically we do this kind of stuff mostly with the get. All right. Now, what about the post? Well, the post will usually not pass anything with the URL, though you can pass it. There is nothing that is stopping you to pass it. Just that we pass any kind of parameter inside the body of the request. Yeah. Now, what do you mean by request? Well, you can think a request as a kind of an envelope. All right. You can think it as a kind of an envelope. So you can draw an envelope, right? An envelope. Okay. So, this is an envelope. So if you pass in some data right within it, so that will be a part of the body of this request. However, if you're typing something right onto your, right on the top of this envelope, these information can be thought as going right with the URL. So if something is showing, that means you are passing it with the query string. If something is not showing, that means it is hidden inside the envelope, right? And the envelope contains the real letter, the data, right? Or you can call it the real payload. So that's the main thing. So you can pass this data either within the envelope or maybe outside. That depends, right? So I'll talk about this payload. What I mean right now, you don't have this payload at all. We are just passing the basic information. Okay, the basic information within the envelope itself, right? So when you pass it within the envelope, we actually have post data. We can also treat it as put, and we can also have it in get, sorry, in delete too. It depends. Let me tell you, nobody is stopping you from passing data even within envelope if you are using the get protocol, right? You can do that. It is totally possible that you can call a get protocol and you can still have some of the information the right within the body of it, right? It's possible, but usually we don't do it. So if you are using post protocol, that means we are telling the system, telling the remote server that get my data right inside my envelope, and that's all about the post protocol. Okay, so now let me so hopefully you got some idea of what these protocols are. These verbs are, these verbs just mean to say that how the server would treat this URL and where the server is going to find your data from, whether it's going to find your data from the URL, the query string, or from inside. And secondly, what the server will do next. This is really, really important. The server can do certain posting action, the server can do certain putting action or deleting action. Now, what exactly post action is? Post action is to save some new information. Save, so I can write down, so whenever we say post, that means save new information, right? All right. Put is to update an existing information. So if we have an information we like to update, so basically putting is updating an existing information. As the word suggests, delete is removal of an existing information. So delete is just deletion of information, right? Now, the API developers in the server must adhere to certain policies. And what that policy is? After an API is processed, API is just nothing but a function call, as I've told you, and I'm going to show you how. Once after it is processed, the server is going to send back certain response, right? So, yeah, response. Basically, it's a play of request and response. So the client made a request to the server and server is sending back certain response. A response is nothing but a data, a block of data. Now, usually these data can be a text, can be anything. Usually we have data in form of JSON. All right. Now, JSON is nothing but a formatted text, or you can have XML. It all depends the how the API developer has created. So the developer might send back JSON to the client, and also client can send data to the server in JSON format. So JSON can be sent and can be retrieved, right? Now this JSON data is a quite structured data. To transfer this data or to get this data, you cannot use the query string. Here is where query string will fail. You cannot use query string to send data, right? And the server sends back data. Definitely the server don't send back query string. The query string is only from the client to the server. But to send a JSON data from client to the server, you definitely would like to put it right within the body. So know this. So if you are sending data to the server, you should consider putting this data right within the body of the request, right? So Just consider that. You should be putting it right within the body. So in these cases, mostly we use post. As I've told you, that get usually don't have this data, but you can definitely do that, right? You can definitely do that. I haven't tried, but I know it can be done, right? I haven't tried it though, fingers crossed, but it can definitely be done. In the post, yeah, you definitely send data inside the body, but also you can send data, some data with the query string. So that means you can pass maybe the basic information on the URL and the more heavier information inside the envelope. So it depends on your on your design of the API, right? Put is exactly that. Some information is definitely passed in the URL, and the majority of the information is passed within the body of it. Delete is usually passed in the URL, and almost nothing is passed in the body, but in you can always pass information within the body. Nobody will stop you from doing that. So let me now, after all of these talks, so let me fire Visual Studio and show you how can you create a very simple API using ASP.NET Core. So let me fire Visual Studio. I'm going to be creating a new project. This always takes time. I don't know why. Maybe I'm recording, that's why a little bit slow. Anyway, that's fine. We got it. So how do you do that? Now I already have the template here, right? It's very easy. I am not going to be using any specific ASP.NET API template creation. I'm just going to be using plain simple controllers, right? And that is just enough. I'm telling you, I repeat, that is just enough. Why? You'll understand that. Let me just write it MVC, all right? Or I can just write ASP.NET, okay? Why? Because ultimately APIs will be hosted on an ASP.NET server, so you need to be creating an ASP.NET web application for that. So ASP.NET, and if you move down, you'll see this ASP.NET Core Web API. We can use this, but however, I can still use this. This is .NET Framework. I can still use ASP.NET Web Application .NET Framework, but I'd like to use the one. I am poor in spotting things. This is Razor Pages, Core API. I'm not going to be using this, just because I don't want to. And we have ASP.NET. Wait a second. Well, I can just write MVC for that matter. MVC. Yep, there we go. So ASP.NET Core Web, Web App Model View Controller. Now, why did I choose this? I'm choosing this because most probably you might have an application which is a web application, and then all of a sudden you want to be creating an API on it, right? So you can do that. I just want to show you that if you already have a ASP.NET web application, and that is what you have been using for long, and all of a sudden you have a need to create APIs, you don't have to do any extra thing. You can create just with what you have. So let me go and click this. Now this demonstration will remain the same whether you use this or whether you use ASP.NET, the .NET framework, whether you use VB.NET or anything. The things are pretty much the same. You'll know why. So let me click on this, click next. Well, let me choose one such folder. Let me go and type in that API. APIs, I can just call it API. My API. All right, my web API. That's it. All right, and let me click next. As of this time of recording, we have got .NET 8. I'm not going to be going into HTTPS. I'm going to be using the top level. I'm not going to be using top level statements. I've already explained what top level statements are in one of my previous videos. You can go watch that. And checking this will have public static void mains and everything. It all says that. I just don't want to have code just like spread over empty white shit. I don't like that. I always want my code to be within structured within public static void main. So here we go. So we have this program.cs. This is a standard ASP.NET MVC application. And yeah, we have it, right? Now we want to be creating a controller first, okay? Now this is just going to be an usual controller. So I'm just going to be right clicking on this controller, click add and click a new controller. You can name this anything you want. I am not going to be clicking on this. I'm telling you, I can click this. I am not doing that. So I'll just go and click this controller, an empty controller, click add. I can just name this anything. Let me call this as an employee controller. Employee controller. I don't like why Microsoft has appended this word, this character one. I hate this. So you need to be having it named as employee controller, right? And click add. So this is just going to be an usual controller. You can run a web page on it, right? So this is just a usual controller. Now, look at this, what I'm going to do. I'm still going to be having this iAction result, and I'm going to be having this as maybe like employee controller, and then I like to name this as show, and then I like to have an ID, maybe int emp ID, right? So let's have it set up like that. So employee controller, I am still returning iAction result, and I'm just saying that I'd like to accept an employee ID and then process that ID would like to return a sample employee. Now for now this sake of demonstration, I'm going to be using a very simple, I'm not going to be connecting with any real database, just going to be creating some random data. Before I do that, I need to be having an employee class. So let me quickly have an employee class in a project, which is just employee, and let me add some properties, which is employee ID, and then one more string employee name. Okay, and maybe one more prop tab will bring up this, and then string, all right, department, one last prop tab. Well, that is the salary of the employee, right? Great. So we have got an employee class with ID, name, department, and salary. I can create a repository layer and all, but just to make things simple, I'm just restricting myself all within this API. You know, this is an API. What we have started creating, this function will be called remotely. So an API is nothing but a function which can be called remotely. It is as simple as that. Now, taking this employee ID, we can make a database search, but for now, we are just assuming that we will get an employee definitely for sure. Okay. So first of all, you know, this employee ID that was provided to this show function may or may not be correct. So you can just have, you know, you can first take this information in a string. This is always good to first take information in a string instead of having it directly in an ID, because the client might not pass anything and then there can be a problem taking this employee ID. The second thing would be to check whether this is an integer or not. Let's say we want to have an employee as the employee as an integer. So let me do this check. So we can do this by, I'll just get this employee ID into a variable EID for short, or employee, I'll write it in short EID, and then we can write this, a Boolean success. I hope that you might know this. It's basically, I'm going to be parsing this, I'm going to be trying to parse this. Try parse employee and then out on this EID. Now, what this really means? It means that you'd like to convert this to this employee ID, which is an out parameter. If it can convert, then the success will be true. All right. You can have it actually as a status. Okay. Status. You can have this as a status. So the status variable means whether you are successful in converting this employee ID into a real integer. If you failed, then this status will be false, right? So out is an output parameter. Note, we don't pass anything. So this is an output parameter. If you don't have good knowledge on that, I have already had a video on this. You can go and watch that. So this is an output parameter. All great. Now, what if the status is false? You need to return some information. Please understand. You need to return some information. uh, Irrespective of the point whether the client has got a right information or wrong information. All right. So if this status is false, that means the user has either not provided any information or he has provided a wrong non-numeric data. Now, in these cases, the client should be scolded with certain error message, right? With certain HTTP error code. Now here comes the central part of this particular session, all right, of this video lecture, that HTTP protocols should always obey this basic rule that apart from sending the response back to the client, it must also send back a response code, right? So let me come back to this diagram. So whenever you are getting some data from the server will send two information. One, the data, I mean the main payload, and second, a little response code. The response code will actually enable the client to understand what kind of data is this. I mean, is this is this data consumable or not? Is this a poison or not, right? If client happens to find anything like 200 or 201, anything to 200 but less than 300, that means the data is not poisonous. I mean, data is good and we can use it somehow. Anything other than them are a it's an indication the server did not work out correctly. Maybe because the server had some exceptions, some issues, or maybe the parameters that you sent to the server are not correct, right? Are not right, and not as far as the server what it needs. So let me show you right now that what can you send back to the client if the parameter employee ID is non-numeric, right? So I can just say if the status is false, okay, then we can do one thing now, right? We can first set the responses status code. Let me tell you, this is something which is very common both in .NET Framework and also .NET Core. I have already tried that, right? So this status code is actually the HTTP status response codes. So this is HTTP response status. All right. Now HTTP response status, this particular class HTTP response status, you can just a second. HTTP response status class. If I am forgetting something, control dot. Let me see. HTTP response codes. Is now we can see it's a bad request, but why is it not working? I can go to the HTTP status code. I can go to this, move to this definition of it. It's not able to get me there. Um, HTTP HTTP status code, most likely. Just a second. I can actually set it directly to like something like 400. Now 400 means actually, forbidden, right? Like 404 means not found. But it's difficult for you to remember these codes. So there is a list of, like error codes which you can really very easily use. So I'm just trying to, remember HTTP status code. Yeah, we got it. Great, man. HTTP status code. Yep. HTTP status code is an enum, right? Now, if I hit dot, we have so many of enum values. I don't have to be remembering bad request or something. You see, as I told you, bad request is 400. Bad request means you made a bad request, man. It just says that the server is saying that you have given me a wrong parameter. So it is a bad request, right? So you can send back this, you can just set this error code right there. If you're wondering that how many such why this is red, I'm going to fix it just real soon, no worries. I just want to tell you that HTTP error code is an enum, okay, and you have a lot of error codes into it. You can just go and go to the definition of it. You'll find all different kinds of error codes. You see, error codes, I should not say error codes, they are response codes, right? Response codes. 100 is continue, there are a lot of them. 200 is okay. This is the most prettiest response code we might expect from the server, okay? But apart from that, we have got 201 created, accepted, lot of error codes. To be a good API developer, you must at least know a few of them, right? You must know at least a few of the error codes, right? There are so many. Found is 302, redirect request. Okay, there are a lot of them. 400 is a bad request. As I said you, unauthorized is 401. Like let's say somebody is trying to connect with your server who don't have the right credentials, you might return 401, right? So there are too many things, right? You can look into these error codes. And internal server error, this usually occurs when you have some exception in the server, when server kind of went into some exception, so that means it went into some catch block. In that case, you can definitely set this internal server error right before you send back the request to the client. So response is status code and this. Now, just because this is an enum and this guy is an integer, I need to convert this guy to an integer. That is all it is requesting for. Okay. So this bad request has to be, I mean, this is just an enum. So enums are enums. You need to be converting. C# is very type safe language. It doesn't let things to mix very easily. You need to convert this to an integer before you plug it into the response. So you have had one of the two things set in the response. So one is the error code, and now you want to actually return the JSON. Now this JSON, you might return a JSON or a string or whatever. Basically, JSONs are nothing but strings. Okay, so they are strings. They are the objects which has been converted into a string. So what we can return right here, we can just say return. You can just say return JSON, all right, and then you can, oops, wait a second, you can actually have a new anonymous object. If you don't know what an anonymous object is an object which doesn't require a class to create itself. You can just set up its properties and it is done, right? So you can just set that, okay, this is my status code. You might say, you might actually pass in some message, maybe some MSG. You can give it any name you want, okay? MSG equals to, you can just have some custom text that invalid employee ID, and you can even send back that why was it invalid, right? So invalid employee ID, and you returned it, right? The next thing is you might not find the employee in a system. Now, of course, since we are not using a real database, let's assume that we have employees between 1 to 100. All right, we have 100 employees, and if you have anything beyond that, either less than 1 or more than 100, we are just going to be sending yet another response code. So we are next going to see, so that's the first thing first, we wanted to see if the parameter is right. we set it as just a status code. Just remember this particular class, and this class is also available in framework. Let me tell you, I've already checked it. It works well, right? And if, okay, now if what? Now I'm going to be doing a very simple check. If this employee ID happens to be less than one, less than, oops, I don't have my number on. So, yep, less than one, or this employee ID happens to be more than 100. So that means, why is it bleeding? Because I need to be using this instead of this, because once it got converted, I am not going to be using this, the string version of it. So if employee ID is less than 1 or if it is more than 100, I'm going to be setting yet another response code. It's very simple. I can just say not found. Okay, not found is 404. It's a very famous response code. Okay, not found is oftentimes emitted by server when you are requesting certain resource and it is not there on the server. So not found means it is not there, so you have plugged it in this status code. Great. Yet again, you might want to send some custom message to the server. Now, it is not mandatory that you should be sending JSON. You can just send simple text messages also. You can just send simple text messages like this. I'm of course going to be sending a JSON because I just want to adhere to one policy of sending JSON all the time. But you can send something like that. You can just say new content result, new content. You can just say not found employee with EMP ID equals to this EMP ID was not found on our server. Okay, so you can definitely do that. So in that sense, whenever you are returning content, you are just sending a plain text instead of a formatted text. The beauty of a formatted text is that you can send even more parameters, and they will all going to be traveling down the wire inside the body of the response. Okay, one important thing that I forgot to tell you is that you must would like to say that how this function is going to be called. If you say that, okay, I want my this function to be called as http, as get, so you can always decorate it with http get. If you do that, now http post cannot call this. Okay, so only gets can call this. Okay, so it's a get. If you don't do this, both get and post can call it, right? If you don't do this, both get and post can call it. But if you specify get, that means you want this URL to be invoked, I mean this function to be invoked specifically using the get request. So I'm just going to be changing this. Instead of having this, I like to send back a JSON with a similar structure message that employee ID was not found. Great, isn't it? The employee ID was not found. And then you also have sent this not found. Now you might say that what is the utility of having both of them? Well, most of the API clients will first look out for your status code, right? It is just like you got some package from some courier or something, now that's the package. Okay, now before you actually open the package, something is written on the top like handle with care. Maybe this is a glass item, right? So you actually know the status of the product inside, so you can see something on the top, right? And you will use extra caution to open that app, right? So it's kind of an extra label, extra sticker that will be sticking on the top of the incoming data or the parcel, right? So you got some data from the server, so that's the reason why you have to stamp this response code before you pass. If you don't, what if you don't? In both of the cases, the default status code is 200, which is a bad thing. You should not say 200. 200 means is all good. We are definitely going to stamp 200, or you don't have to because by default it is 200. So you don't have to be, you should be stamping these response codes. That's the part of the protocol. If you don't follow it, then you are a bad API developer, all I can tell you. So remember to stamp a status code and also to pass the actual payload. That's the data, okay? And we always write JSON and then new this stuff, right? Now, yep. So that's it. So if it is either less than one or more than 100, we are just going to be sending a not found. And I'm sorry, actually press KD to align my code. Yep, all aligned now. So if this is so, this is it. Now, if that is not so, we have a final thing. So we can actually have some else ifs to say if this data is false. Otherwise, we will check for the validity of this. Else is the only way now that we know that the employee is there. We need to be sending back some sample data. Now we want to create some sample data. For that, I always love my random class. Random r equals to new random. Okay. And then I also have some kind of some department. You know it why I'm writing this. I always love this to have in some random department, maybe IT and maybe sales. We can also have like IT sales and admin and HR. Let's skip it. Four. Okay, we have four departments. Now we are going to be creating some random names, some random departments, some random ID is definitely not random because that's what we're searching for, right? So let me go and create an employee object. So employee, okay, as I hit enter, automatically Visual Studio will automatically get these models up there. Previous version of Visual Studio did not do that. We have to be writing this using statement manually. So employee EMP equals to new employee. That's great. And now I'm going to be injecting some value into it. So employee.id is definitely the ID, EID that we got, right? So that's the ID, definitely. And the employee's name, now what can be the name of the employee? We can use GUID for that. Now, some random name. So we can use GUID dot new GUID, all right, dot to string. That can be a random name, but this will be too big. I like to restrict myself to a substring all up to 0 to first 8 characters, right? You can go watch it why this is really so. These grids are very essential. They can create some random strings of certain length, okay? And that's what it is. So that's a grid. String grid looks like this, some 8 and then 4 4 4, and the last one is 12. So that's how the grids are. All right, Visual Studio gives a lot of intelligence, which is a good thing to learn and understand. All right, Visual Studio is a co-pilot, so it's not only you who is flying, it's the co-pilot who is helping you out. So employee ID, employee name, and we have to set some random department. I could have used a random GUID too, but I always love to have departments within certain values, but we want it a random. So for that, what we'll do is that I am just going to say DEPT. Now I'm going to be choosing a random index. Now for that, I can choose 0, that is the first index, and then DEPT.length. Okay, so anything between 0 to less than length, I mean if I write length, it'll always give one less than that. So it's going to be choosing any one of these departments randomly. So we have a department. Why is it bleeding? It's a string, that's fine. Oh, I am sorry. So I need to be indexing. I just need to, I did a mistake. I need to be calling this random function here, r dot random next function, and then pass in anything between this. Okay, so that's a random index. Okay, that's a random index. If you're fearing what is exactly that, we can actually have it here. Int random index is this. Okay, and then plug in this random index right here. So that's the random index, and you want this department to be any one of these index, whether it can be 0, 1, 2, or 3. Minimum 0, maximum 3. That's what this index gives us, and then we plug it here. We got our department. All right. So far, so good. And next, what? Do you have anything left? emp.salary. This one I'm going to be using the random class and give me any salary, let's say between 10,000 to 50,000, right? So anything between. It can include a minimum of 10,000, but less than 15,000, at least one, I mean, one less than that. It will never reach up to this number. Just gives one less than the second parameter. That's how the random's next function works. So we are all set up. We got a new employee. Now that we need to be returning back to the server. So I'm going to be copying this status, but of course not found. This time I'll say okay, and that is 200, a pretty 200. Okay. Even if I don't do this, it's going to come up as okay, but I'd like to stick to our policies. And then return a JSON, of course. But now within this JSON, we can directly transfer this employee information, which is this EMP. We can also actually have the same, our protocol. I just follow this new every time, I can write a message here, message that employee found, right? And then as a second argument, I can actually pass this employee. Okay, now once again I'm telling you, okay, I must close this, that these are anonymous objects and we can give any name you want. It's up to you. I can write employee as a whole, whole value. So this is message and the employee is the whole employee, right? So employee is employee. But I would like to stick to this EMP. It's very good. EMP. All right. So EMP is this EMP and message employee found. That is all. Let me tell you, you can now just changing this get to post. Okay, instead of having get, if you write post, that means you are sending some employee real data into it. That is to say, you want to be creating a new employee data. Let me quickly show you how that can be done. And other protocols, put and delete, are pretty much the same. So I'm just going to be having this. I missed one such, yeah. So I can just say post new employee or save. Okay, save. And in this case, we need to be passing the whole employee details. So I can just call it EMP. And in this case, I must decorate this as post. Okay, and then I can just save this employee. Now, where are we saving our employees? All right, we must have some place to save our employees. Then where are we saving our employees? We are not saving anywhere, just is kind of a faking up thing. Now I can save this employee anywhere, of course. All right, and then of course I can just even return some custom the employee ID, auto generated employee ID. Let's say this employee will be saved somewhere and an auto generated employee ID will be created. So somebody is going to be sending this employee, and after I save, I need to be producing some kind of information back to the client that yes, Mr. Client, we are successful in saving your employee, or we are not successful in saving your employee. It can be any way, right? And if you're successful, you need to be showing in most of the case some distinctive ID. It is most likely the auto-generated ID. So let me do that. Let me fake up that. So what we can do is that, let's say that, okay, first of all, we need to make sure that this employee object contains some information or whether it is null. The same thing here also, we should first check if this employee is null. That is, we don't have anything here. Then, it's a bad request. The same thing. I'm going to be copying this guy. It's a bad request. So we are not going to be doing anything. So it's a bad request. I can just say invalid. I should, of course, say here that no employee was supplied. Okay, so it's a bad request. So you try to do something which is like against the policy. So you send it back. Okay, Now, if it is not so, you can actually do more checks. You can see if the employee's name is empty or not. You can do more checks, and you can send back these kind of bad requests or insufficient arguments. There are a lot of like values you can go and check. You can, it's up to you what kind of status code you want to return. Of course, that should be according to what you actually want to say, so these status codes gives an extra layer of information apart from the real payload. So if this is null, okay, this, otherwise else, I'm going to be sending back the client that, yeah, everything went good. So I'm just going to say, okay. Now, not okay. In this case, we should write created, okay? These are the protocols you must adhere. You might give okay, but okay is not the right message. Created means, yeah, you were successful in creating a new request. Okay, so created means, so apart from, see, created, you have, okay, so created is when you actually create a new content. No content is when you don't want to pass any content back to the server. It's a blank one, okay, no content at all. It's an empty content. All right, so there are plenty of them. As I want to tell you that you can actually use them. It's all up to you, like whichever you want to use. So dot created is a great one, okay, and then you just want to actually pass a simple id of the employee which was created. So I usually write employee id equals to, I can give any number here. I can just, how can I fake up an ID? Well, I can use random stuff again, but there is another way to do randomness. I can use date time dot now dot total millisecond. That's great. Millisecond is quite random stuff. So I want to be returning some millisecond, just faking up things. Never mind. Okay, you have to be calling database using entity framework or edu.net, whatever you like, and then those are the talks that you all already know probably, and then you get this employee ID which was just injected, and then you send back this response. But make sure that you want to have created. Okay, created means you just have created it. Okay, now after I have post, very simple, let me have similar thing like put is when you want to like save and update an existing record. So you can just write it an update. Okay, I can call it anything. It's up to you what you want to call it. Okay, now here you actually would like to pass two information. That is where you must understand. Number one information is the employee ID. Okay, and because you really want to say that this is the ID that I want to update. Apart from the ID, now this ID will actually be a part of the query string. Okay, the main query string. It will pass with the query string, but we still want to pass the rest of the information which also includes this ID. I know it's like passing both together. There are many people who don't use this, okay? They just use this. But I just want to stick to this policy of passing the employee ID and also passing this employee. Now here you want to restrict the client not to pass this data in any way in the main query string itself. What you can do is that you can just say that this is form data. Okay, form data. Wait a second, it is form data. I might be doing some mistake. It's from the payload. All right. Now, if I make it put, that's fine. But a second, it should be HTTP from data. All right. See, even here, I have just want to send it. See, if you make this thing post, you you might you might not send it via the URL. Okay, so let's not write the form data for now. Okay, but let's see if I can also pass data right to the URL if I have this. But definitely I can pass this employee ID if I make it input. So yep, you can always like pass information if you have this. But I don't know why this form data is not working. So this should have been working. But let me try one more time. From data something from data. Sometimes I no, it's not coming up. Okay, let's forget this. Not a problem. Let's keep it like that. Not an issue. So let's let it be like integer employee ID and employee. Okay. So if okay, so what we need to write here, the first of all, of course, we need to see this employee is null. Then no employee was supplied. That's fine. The second thing is we can then try to update this information. Okay. Now, once the employee gets updated, you can just write, there are a lot of status codes. You can just say that no content, or usually input protocol, you can point somebody to a URL where the data was actually found. So you can say it's a no content equivalent to 404 has been processed and the response intentionally blank. Usually we do this for the delete protocols. Okay, so I'm just seeing if I not modified. If I see anything which is good to use, request processing not modify. We can of course use OK in this case too, OK means if it is something is not found, is not found. Moved. I'm trying to see if something like updated is there. Created is when you have a new content, okay? And no content, no. We don't have anything for updated. All right. So we can just say OK. OK means that's the most best thing for updates. OK means OK, content has been updated. And once the content is updated, you might would like to, you might like to point to a URL where the data will be found. Okay, this is usually accepted norm. So you can basically say, okay, here is a URL where you can now get your data. So we can write an URL equals to, basically you can just say, okay, here is the URL where the data can be found. Give me some moment. I haven't talked about how to get down to that URL stuff. So I would like to have a URL where you can now locate this data. In fact, we can also do this in the created also. Once you have created, you might also like to give the URL where the data can be found. So here again, we need to be getting to an URL where the data can now be located. Once after you save it, here is where you can find it. Usually in the put, we don't do it. The put means, okay, so whatever you want to update, the data has been updated. That's fine. So basically you can return no content. Okay, so you can, yeah, you can return no content most likely most of the time. So dot no content will be good for this reason. I believe it so. So no content means your data has been updated, it's all good, and there is absolutely no content. Now, how do you actually transfer no content? It's very simple. You can just write empty. You need not to pass in any JSON response. You can just say empty, uh, return empty content, empty result. Okay, you can just return empty result. That's it. Return empty result. In this case, you must write return new empty result. That's it. Yep. So empty result means just nothing. You're not actually sending any response back to the client, right? So it's a no content. So that means it's all good and everything went good. Same is the case for delete. Updates and deletes are, like they're brothers. So it's all the same. Just that delete deletes it, delete it. Okay. And then let me not have this at all. So here too, we first make sure that this employee ID is found. So for that, we can still use this logic if the employee ID is found. All right. So if the employee ID is found, yep, the employee ID is not found. If it is not found, we are still going to say not found and it's not found. All right. So, yep. So this is my employee ID. I can still have, see, I have used int, but you should first be taking it for the sake of time. I am not using string anymore, but you should first be taking the data into a string, first process that if it is a valid string or not, and then should go out for other processing. But I'm using directly employee ID here. I'm not checking whether it is string, but you should definitely take data as string first. All right, so this is delete. I'm checking whether this is within this limit. If it is not found. Otherwise, once again, uh, uh, there is nothing like deleted or removed, right? So we can again say no content, okay? So no content, everything is fine. So it was deleted. We can just return an empty result. All right. So now let's see how to use it. But before you use it, there's an if statement, else and else. Okay, return content. This is unreachable code because we don't need this anymore because we have got 3 sections, 3 branches. All of these branches are returning something, so we don't need that extra return. So we're basically done with writing an API which has got this show, save, update, and delete, right? Are the 4 verbs, the 4 important CRUD operations. So using APIs, you can do CRUD operations, you can do anything you want. But basically, I wanted to show you the CRUD operations using APIs. But it's up to you. You can have many parameters here. You can have like 4 to 5 to 6 parameters. It's all up to you. Now, how to call them is, since you are using the normal controller, they will be called just as we use the normal controller. That is, this will be called like this, employee. First of all, the domain name will be there, then employee, okay, then / show. Since you are passing some data into it, so you need to be writing something like this, and this employee ID equals to some value, right? This will start up, the URL will be definitely this, the URL will be like this. Sorry, the URL will be save, but there will be no parameter because you might think that we have something, so I need to pass something here. No, this data will be passed as a body. Okay, so here I'll write a comment that employee EMP will be passed inside the body instead of in the URL. That is how it is. I was trying some form body. I don't know why it is not working. If you can tell me that what I missed, just don't want to waste time by looking into internet right now, but it should be working. Okay, so employee EMP, that should be working. Okay, and so that means this data need to be passed as a part of the payload. That should be passed inside the body, whereas this is the main URL. The put, yes, of course, in the put request, in the put we have this, so it will definitely start with the employee. Okay, and then update, and then question mark. We really would like to pass this employee ID, like let's say we want to update some employee having ID 50, and then rest of the data is lying within the body. So then rest of the data that is, this EMP that actually contains the data to be updated will be passed inside the body. So EMP will be passed, the actual data that need to be modified will be passed within the body. Now the final thing comes the post, comes the, I'm sorry, I did not write this delete, I'm sorry, delete. Okay. So, yep. So last thing is delete. You know how it works. It's very simple. I copied and pasted. So this will just be employee and delete. And then the employee to be deleted need to be passed in the form of the URL. Maybe empid is equal to 50, right? It will be deleted. Now, I have not done anything to delete anything. I just wanted to say that something got deleted. So here you should write real code to delete the record. Okay, you can say delete the resource. The API terminology, everything is a resource. Okay, so you want to delete the resource. All right, so okay, so you want to delete this resource, and then you write some code, and finally we have to be returning some status. All right, so one thing you might have seen that I have missed doing this here, once after you say created, you must actually also send a custom URL where the data can now be found. It's very simple. You can just say, okay, now you can find the data in employee forward slash show and then question mark EMPID equals to what you know, this EMPID, right? EMPID. Oops. EMPID equals to, yes, that's an important thing. This is the EMPID that was just created. So actually I should use this random data somewhere here, maybe int auto generated EMPID equals to this guy. Okay, so I will just write it here. This is the auto generated employee ID that was just auto generated. Once again you need to be writing code for that. I am keeping these work for you. These are simple thing. You can save it to the database, and so this is kind of a mimicking that, okay, I got some millisecond and that is basically the employee ID. So you are passing it here and also passing the URL where you can identify this resource. Yes, resource. So you are passing the URL as a part of the payload, that where it can be located again, how can you find it, and definitely this is the employee ID that was created. So you are passing two information to the client, that one, what is the employee ID that was created, and second, how can you discover this data later. So this is how you can discover the data later. One thing I should tell you, that if you don't like this particular way of URL, that is, I just don't want that employee save to work like this. Okay, let's consider this one. I just don't want it to the URL should be like something like employee and show and the employee ID. Then you can create a custom route, and the custom route can be created for any one of these APIs. So let me create a custom route wherein I want to say that, okay, the custom route will be like this, like employee, show employee, then something like this, okay, and then the EMPID. Yes. So when you do this, this is very interesting. When you do this, that means you want to pass this EMPID right with the main URL. So in this case, it is no more this now, no more this. You can use this directly by directly by having the main URL, that is your server name, and then show employee, then forward slash, and then write 50. It's all good. You can just write like that because you want to punch this with the URL itself. So you can define such a custom route anywhere you want. right? You can use custom route for post, for put, for delete. It just works well, right? It just works well. For example, I want to have a custom route for delete. So let me have once again route, and then you might want to say, oops, I'm sorry, Control Z. This is a attribute. So route attribute, and then you want to say that delete employee, and then and now for now I really want to plug in like this, so we can just say employee id equals to the employee id that is being sent, which is this employee id. So that means this route will work like that: the delete employee question mark employee id equal to the given employee id, right? So whatever is sent, I mean, this will be mapping automatically with this, I mean, with this particular, with this parameter. So I don't know why this is green. A literal section is invalid. Literal character cannot contain employee id. Literal section cannot contain question mark. Or let's do this. Let's do this. That's it. Okay. I just want to pass this employee directly like this. Okay. So it's now no more this. It can be just plugged in with the employee ID directly like that. I think I missed something. Question marks are also there. If I'm missing something, I don't mind, because I'm not looking at internet to teach you. It is just directly whatever coming in my mind, I'm just telling you. So you can look out for the internet, you can check yourself, like, okay, just to get in the information, you can give question mark, and it's very simple. You can just look it out for that. I'm just trying to give you the concepts. So we are all done. Basically, we are all done. How can we check it that if we are done or not? We have to first start this application. So this application is now starting. Remember, the first is show employee with certain employee ID. Let me actually copy everything from here. Our server has started. Yep, our server has started. Now, to use a GET protocol, I even don't need to come to our, Postman. Second, right? Postman. I don't have to be plugging to Postman to check to have the GET request most of the time. I'll show you why and how. Okay, this is the default page that has opened. It has got nothing to do with the API. Remember, this is the main application server's URL. Then remember this show employees. So I can just copy and paste this. Show employee. This is what the Postman is starting. Okay, let it start. Okay, you see this localhost show employee 50, right? So now if you're having difficulty looking at this, oh, this calls out for allow access and everything. Okay, yeah, the Postman can be installed. It's free of cost, as I've told you, so you can definitely use this. It requires a one-time registration. That's good. So I don't know whether you're able to see this or not. Let me fire up the magnifier. This is the URL. Okay, localhost employee 50. Now let me hit enter. And there we are. The browser can show this. This is the JSON data that you received from the server. I can have a pretty print, and you can see it like that. So employee found, great. Employee, this is the employee data. So this message is employee found, and this employee, this is the data, right? This is the entire data. How did he find that? Let me close it now again. How did he find this? It's just because something coming up. Okay, business now. Okay, so I like to show you from, of course, from the Postman. But before that, let me show you how the data has come. Just because it has hit this, according to this route, it has reached here. The status is good. We did not pass anything wrong, right? And therefore, this is also good because it's not within. I mean, this section was not also executed, and the data was good. We got it 200, but we could not see that whether we got 200 or not. How can we really get this information from the browser itself? Is it possible? Yes, it is possible. I will show you how. So, if you right click and if you go to the inspection tool, in the console of it, you can see this some kind of status updates here. Okay, so what I can do is, let me have a wrong value. Let me have something like A, B, C, D. This is definitely not a integer. Hit enter. See, do you see this? It says bad request. How are these coming? They're coming nothing but from your API itself. And the actual body of the response has come, right? You see, invalid API, invalid employee ID. We got that in the JSON format because it's our coding. We return that in JSON format. Okay, now so far so good. Like get requests can really be done from the browsers, from this from this address bar, but of course we can't do things so easily using browser for post and other stuff. This is the reason probably we need to use. Oh, I stopped this HTTP. I mean, I stopped this API. I need to be running this. That is why we need Postman. Okay, so how can we use Postman to connect with it? Let us discuss it right now. First of all, look at this basic URL. I'll copy this. Okay. And here I can create a new collection. I can create a new collection. Okay. A blank collection. You can give this any name you want. I can just call it like API checks tests. Okay. And now I can just go on adding a new request. I can click a new request. As I add a new request, it defaults to get by default, and now I need to be passing the main URL, which is localhost this guy, and this is the main URL. And after doing this, what I need to do is I need to be, as you know, that I need to be passing this data. I mean, this extra value, this extra part of the URL, right? So that is where you want to go. This is what is this guy, like where do you want to go, as I've told you, right? So where do you want to go? So this part is this, right? So this part is the entire thing where you want to go, and what if you want to pass any extra information in the URL itself. We are not passing anything in the body. If you really wanted to, you can have it in the body. Why not? You can go in the form data, raw data. You can start typing data here also, right? You can start typing data in the get itself. Many people don't do that, but you can send data even when you are using get. Get request just says that. Why? Get request just means you want to get some information, and the data that can be returned, okay, usually they can be returned. I mean, the get request is very simple. It just means you want to get some new data, as the name suggests, right? It means that you want to get information, you want to send some information right in the query string only. This is all it says. But using get request only, you can send data inside the body too, and the API can send back data as a part of it the payload of it right inside its body. So it is all secured. Just that get request says that I would like to pass data in the URL more often than not. Okay, now let me click send. You got this data, right? It's all the same as you saw in the browser previously. But apart from that, do you see this 200 okay, right? This 200 okay. That means this guy, this response was created by the server. Now we got this employee. Now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to be copying this for some reason. This is my JSON data. Now I like to create a new resource. For that, I would like to execute this save. And to execute this save, I need to I need to have, you know, one more. Just a second. I can just say that uh, duplicate. Okay, duplicating just gets you another such. All right, and then I can just change it to post. First of all, look at this. We have got so many protocols. I need to change this to post, and then I need to be pasting the same thing. But wait a second, I don't need this show employee in this case. I need to be typing in exactly the URL that is responsible for saving the employee. So employee save, all good. And after that, what we do? We have to be we have to be passing a new employee record. You see, that is what it is requesting, right? So this information has to be passed inside the body. I have already copied. I have to be going into the raw, okay, and then paste this. Why I pasted this, because I can just edit this information. Let's say I want to have a new record, like maybe I know, okay, let me have like 77, let's say, new employee. Now if even if I write this, this will be not be used at all, because it will automatically give you the new auto generated ID. So you can completely ignore this, right? You can ignore this. You just have to be giving a new employee name. Maybe this new name is Sam. Okay. Department is ID, and maybe some salary, whatever you want Sam to get, right? And then I have to send it. Before that, make sure everything is good. You are using the post protocol. The API endpoint is good, and you are sending his payload data to the server. And you do that just by clicking on the raw, and you pass this data. And what else? You can click send, and bingo, you see this. These all are random things. It created a 840 employee ID. Unfortunately, I cannot see this, but you can make it click, right? Now if you click on this, nothing is going to work, but it just says that it's all good, and you can see this 201 created. You got this. Shows how much time server took to respond. So employee ID 840. So new resource was created at this URL. I mean, you can be accessed via this URL, and the ID is 840. But of course, I have not coded anything so that actually the data can be saved. The data has not been saved anywhere, right? It's just a uh, kind of a conceptualization. I'm just faking up things here. So the next one is all about put. It's all the same. I can just write. I can just replace it by update. Okay, here you see update, and you can also see that we are using employee ID also, right? Because this employee ID will be the part of the main URL. So I can just write employee ID, and then we can write anything. Maybe you want to update 100th employee, but you want to update the data with what? You want to update the data with this. So yeah, you want to be updating this to someone else, maybe Shudipto, my name, okay, and an ID and some value, right? And now I want to send this. But of course, remember, I did a mistake. I mean, I was about to do a mistake. It need to be set to put. Put means updating record. Click send. It is just going to say no content because it has just successfully updated. It just means that everything is good. We don't have anything to return you. The data has been updated, which is fine. And the same for the delete, right? But we have changed the delete protocol a little bit. We have to be using this route instead of this guy. So we can just say delete, and then we don't need to type in the whole employee ID. We just have to give a forward slash and then 100. Okay, hopefully you are able to see my screen. It's small. So delete. If you want me to start the magnifier once more, I can turn on the magnifier. So yep, you can hopefully see this now very clearly. So delete is like this. All right. So we are going to be firing this delete, and this is the custom route that you have created, and 100 is the resource that you want to get deleted. We don't need to be passing anything in the body right now. Okay, nothing. We don't need. Even if you pass, it will be ignored, right? Let me send it. Take some time. It says 204, no content. That means the data got deleted perfectly well. If I send something like maybe 101,001, the application will say that not found. See, 404 not found. That means the data employee ID 1001 was not found, right? So that means it actually, the API is sensible. API is returning us the status codes very clearly, and when it is sending some status code, it's also sending some JSON response. We can use this response to show something to the client. So that was it, dear friends. Hopefully you got some idea about creation of an API, and also be able to use API from your Postman. You have other clients also, I mean free clients to test APIs, like we have got Fiddler, we got Swagger, right, which is integrated in Visual Studio itself. Swagger is something, a tool which can be used right from the browser itself. But most of the people will use Postman to test APIs. So hopefully you got some good understanding, good concept. Let me know if you got any question, any doubt. And that was it. Thank you very much for giving your time to listen to my lecture as of now. Bye bye. I'll see you back again.